So I want to thank you for joining us to our virtual workshop today called Building Your Family Emergency Toolkit. My name is Amanda Bollig. I'm the Program Project Specialist here at Loudoun Habitat for Humanity. I oversee our home repair program as well as the Tools for Life Learning Center. So we're going to go ahead and get started today with our goals for the presentation. So during the course of the presentation, we're going to first address what an emergency toolkit is. We'll explain why it's important to have one, and then we will wrap everything up about where you should keep your toolkit and maybe who you should share it with as well. Joining us today is Ruth McElroy. Ruth is a partner at the law firm of Cisneros, McElroy and Boone. Ruth has had a lot of different accomplishments throughout her career, but we are most thankful for her partnership to Loudoun Habitat for Humanity by being on our board. So Ruth, we're very excited to have you. We can't wait to hear about all the things you're going to share with us. We know you've got a lot of knowledge and expertise on this subject. So if you have questions for Ruth during the course of her presentation, you'll use your chat box to enter those questions, but we're not going to answer them until the end of the presentation. So if you want to put them in the chat during the presentation, we'll keep track of that. Or if you want to save it till the very end, you can do that as well. So first, we want to just get started with a poll question just to kind of see what you maybe know already about a family emergency toolkit. So your poll question today is very easy. What is a family emergency toolkit? So that's going to go ahead and be launched to you now. You'll see a screen pop up and you're going to go ahead and answer. It's multiple choice and everything is anonymous. So don't worry if you feel like you don't know the answer. We're going to explain that to you. So go ahead and answer that poll question now, and then Ruth is going to give you the answer to it, and that'll launch us into our discussion.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you, Amanda, for inviting me. I think this is an important topic, so I hope that I can impart some of my information to you. And as she said, if you have questions, just send them into the chat, and we'll try to address them at the end.
All right, we'll give everybody just a little bit more time to answer that poll question, and then we're going to share the results, and then Ruth will give us the answer on the next slide.
Wow, it looks like we have some smart people here today. So, so the answer is that it is a list of all important information that you would need in an emergency in case something happened to you or something happened to your home or your family. So that's sort of in a nutshell what we're talking about today. Amanda, you can go to the next slide. All right, so what's in this toolkit? I get a lot of questions about, what do I need to retain? How long do I need to retain things? There's no particular order here, but I'll just start at the top left there. Copies of vital records. So what would that be? Social Security cards, obviously, marriage certificates, death certificates, which, even of, formerly deceased members, that can come up, that can be very important when we're talking about property rights, trying to gather all of your documents. A lot of times I get questions for copies of death records, and they're not as easy to obtain like marriage records and those sort of things. But certainly your birth records and your Social Security card are the two top items there. Medical information. We'll get more into the details of each one of these as we go along, but obviously if you have a medical condition, you need to consider, keeping people informed of that in an emergency. Financial records, and we'll talk about, which ones I'm talking about specifically that are important to retain for someone else's viewing. Certain legal documents. And then there's a category here that I'm going to talk about today, additional miscellaneous items that I think are important that you may or may not have thought about. So we'll, briefly go over each one of these. So we can go to the next slide, Amanda. Okay, so here's some examples of copies of vital records that I think everyone should have at their, and we're talking about, we'll get to this a little bit later, how do you store these items? But we're talking about typically in a box, in a binder. What I typically advise clients to do is have sort of a binder with those plastic sleeves where you can, organize, categorize, and keep things, especially your copies of vital records. so that if people are handling them, they're not getting dirty, that sort of thing. So just a few examples here: your driver's license or government identification. We've already spoken about your social security cards, obviously your passport, very important to have nowadays. Your birth certificates, adoption papers. Those are something that, people tend to set aside but sometimes need later. So we would definitely want to include those in any sort of binder that you're making for yourself and your family. Important immigration papers, marriage license, as I said, death records, any really, I put it under a category of any government issued piece of paper that is, whether difficult or not to replace, have in one spot and make sure that you protect it with those sleeves. For the simplest way to keep these type of items is just to sleeve them and binder them. Next, medical information. This is a very broad category, of course, but as we age, obviously you need a copy of your insurance card, but as we age, we tend to have more medications that become vital. And in case something happens to you, if you're stranded, I've had this situation with clients recently where someone was stranded overseas. They ran out of certain medications and the family really had no idea where that medication was filled, the dosage, anything like that. So even if it's just a handwritten list, and I tell clients sometimes just go to your pharmacy. Most people use one pharmacy. Go to your pharmacy and ask them for a list of all of your current medications. Now, for children under 18, a parent can do this, but if you're asking for a spouse or another member of the family, you would have to get their permission to get that list from the pharmacy. But I find it to be the easiest way just to get a current, up-to-date list of what a person is taking. And then you have to remember to update it periodically. Next, immunization records for your children. I can't tell you how many times I was asked for that as my children were growing up, and I finally got smart and put it, the minute that record was updated, the doctor typically gives you a copy. I went ahead and took it home and stuck it in that sleeve and replaced the old one that was no longer valid. Obviously, any life-threatening allergies to medications, food. Sometimes people don't think about that. But when you're hospitalized, that is a question. That's one of the first questions they ask you. They want to control your diet and your medications based on allergies. Okay, next. All right, the large question of financial records. So a little bit, of my personal story. My mother was recently taken ill, and she did a pretty good job of keeping things organized, but she was also a very private person, and it was difficult for us to locate she had things in all different places. So one of the first things that we realized that we needed were copies of her bank statements. My brother and I really weren't even sure where they banked anymore. They had moved banks several times. Luckily, she lived in a small town, so that wasn't, too difficult for us to discern. It would have been a whole lot easier if she had kept a copy once a month, even if it was just a list of her banking accounts. That's what I personally have. I just have a list of where I do business and the last 4 digits of the account number, and I just keep updating the list as those things change. I have recently started to stick in a copy of the last statement, because that, it gives you typically contact information, your branch, phone numbers, everything is there at one fingertip if you have to call the bank. Copies of your credit card statements. If something, an emergency happens or a death happens in the family, you will also want to have a copy of who you can call and how to get in touch with those persons. Copies of all of your credit cards. We were going through, in my personal situation, trying to figure out, do we need to cancel cards or, go down to one card, consolidate. So again, my mother was pretty good about keeping records like that. We found, she only had a few. We went right to her wallet, and then we found some statements that she had already gathered for us, because I had given her this list, a few months before this incident happened. Very important, copy of all your investment account statements. And we'll talk a little bit later about, how to keep these records private, but having a list for, someone that needs to take over your financial affairs, especially in my personal case where my father has dementia and my mother was his caregiver, we needed to immediately get him care. And you have to have a copy of their finances to be able to do that in this day and age. So that was very helpful that my mother had gathered those. Copies of any retirement account statements, the same thing. If you have retirement accounts at your employer, a lot of people do not get the paper statements anymore, but you can again keep a list of the contact information. The way I have it, I just have who they should call and a current phone number. And then that person is authorized by me. You know, I know I'm letting that person know that this list is sitting there for my loved ones to deal with if they have to in case of an emergency. Okay, next. Oh, the big topic of legal documents. So obviously, you know, we advise that everyone have the sort of the trifecta of estate documents, which is your living will, your medical directives, and any power of attorneys. So most people are familiar with what a power of attorney is. Your medical directives are typically, you know, what services you want done on your behalf, and you're going to designate someone to determine those types of services. So this is a great way for you to be these 3 estate documents to be in control of your financial affairs during an emergency or death. So obviously a copy of your will and your living will, your medical directive of, you know, what steps you want taken and who can determine those steps, and a copy of a power of attorney. The power of attorney is typically the ones that we use are called springing power of attorneys, where if an incident happens that it's a simple word of this document springs into action, and it would not have any legal effect until an incident happens that you would need this document. Obviously copies of any divorce decrees, any kind of postnuptial agreement, prenuptial agreements, those things I would include in legal documents. Anything we typically tell people that is signed by a notary and that you need to retain the original copy, which should be in this folder as well. Obviously deeds, lease agreements, if you're a renter, for the simple reason of, you know, if something happens, I do a lot of guardianship and conservator work. When a party is removed from the home and needs to go into a facility, we need to contact the landlord and terminate the lease. If you don't know who that is or how to contact that person, it can be very difficult and time consuming to run around trying to do those things. Think about the assets that you own. Some of these assets come with documents that prove ownership, like car titles and the banking information if you have a loan against that car. Obviously your insurance policies, home and life insurance. These also have typical contact people. So I tell my clients to print out the front page of these documents where it lists the company, the contact name, and then a brief summary of what you're holding with those particular companies. Also your pet ownership records, and I always include a copy of what vet you're currently using, and immunization records. If you know, if someone would need to step in and take care of your pets for an extended period of time, they need to know who to call and what medications, again, that your pets are on in an emergency situation. All right, so here's just some miscellaneous items that we found over years that, you know, help people keep their affairs in order if something happens. And duplicate keys. This is like, we typically advise this when a party is older. Make sure that someone has a key to your property so that they can get in if they need to. Also, a comprehensive list of emergency phone numbers. Now, obviously, this list I have used for, you know, a number of years. Traveling, when I've left my kids at home with grandparents, they need a full list of emergency, the pediatrician, the school, any kind of, you know, emergency for minor children. You also need emergency phone numbers for yourself and your spouse. Doctor's contact, that sort of information is what we're talking about here, so that someone, if they need to get in touch with individuals that help you manage your life, they're right there at their fingertips. Any other important contact information. For example, my mother had a list already sitting there of my brother and myself, our addresses and our cell phone numbers. And that was critical to, you know, when the incident happened, someone got in touch with us immediately. They would have been scrambling around because honestly, my mother had address books that dated back 30 years and you couldn't find a thing in them, but she was old school and wrote everything down. But we had typed up a list for her and she had it right by her phone, so they were able to find it quickly. Any important photographs that you have. A lot of people now are photographing documents. A very common one right now is the vaccine card, making a photo of that card. So have that photo with your emergency kit. Have a photo, if you've taken additional photos of your passports, that someone can then grab a copy or the actual photos, and their important photos are with your documents. So this would be also under the category of if you had an emergency in your home, a fire, that sort of thing. There are certain photos that I know we all have that we all want to, you have that scenario where you think of grabbing up things and, leaving the house. Have all this in one place. It just makes it so much easier. We're going to take another poll. So why do you need this emergency toolkit? I think that, what we've already talked about, you probably have a very good idea, but if you could just answer our poll question here, and we'll see how much you all have already learned. All right, we'll wait for the results to be shared. I think everyone's up. There we are. Okay, so 80% of you think it's all the above and 20 think it's in case of death. It's definitely in case of death, but it can be all of the above. It can also be an emergency situation that happens. So if you're involved in any kind of emergency situation, whether it be a neighbor or your family member that needs to assist, having this emergency toolkit and having it readily available. And what that means is having someone who knows where it is, or a contact sheet of who you should call in an emergency. And in fact, I just the other day updated mine because I wanted to make sure that my children's cell phone numbers were updated, and they've all changed emails as they've gone through college, done with college. The emails change constantly. So I updated that because that was also a feature that everyone was asking us for with the situation with my mother. So who needs this kit? Is this something that you're doing for every member of your family? I mean, ideally, it should be for each adult and child in the home, but it doesn't have to be, every single item that we listed. It can certainly be a head of household sort of item where, you're listing those very important items, the estate documents for the parents, the immunization records for the children. I would say that if if it seems daunting to you, to start small and just at least get a list of where you bank and who your contacts are and who your doctors are, especially for the aged population, who the doctors are and who's, been in charge of their care. Banking records and estate documents would be the top 3 for that. If you're a younger family, a mom or dad or both, and some children underage in the household, a little bit different kind of toolkit. And you can start start small. Make sure that as a child receives a driver's license, you add that. As a child is born, you add their birth certificate. This toolkit is very much an item that's going to build over the years. And it's not that difficult to assemble if you just keep up with it as these documents come into your household. Even if I had, one person who was just not very well organized, and I said, look, just get those big yellow manila envelopes and, put a label on each one of them. And as it comes in, just put it in the right envelope per the label. And that was her way to do it. And she kept very well organized and didn't have to, spend a whole lot of time making up a binder and spreadsheets and all that. She had saved that for, more of a summer activity. She was a teacher. And I was very proud of her that she then did go on in the summer and finished her binders, and they came out great. So this brings up this last question then of how do I keep this? I mean, I personally have sort of the fire safe box where I do have a small, maybe 1-inch binder in there that's a ring binder where people can easily flip and find things. But I also have in there the birth certificates, the passports. There's also like a passport identification card that I keep on all of my children. I have copies of their driver's license. And again, you can sort of however organized you are. You can put them in folders, you can binder them with the sleeves, you can keep the large envelopes, and, or just, I've seen just a box too, where as long as that box is dedicated just to these items, you do need to let someone know, I think a trusted friend or, where certainly a family member, where you keep this box, especially if it's a fire safe box, because some people tend to hide those in their homes and you don't want someone to have to, go hunting for that. So who should have a copy? I would definitely say a family member outside of your household, someone you trust. If you don't have a family member, a trusted friend, just so that, you know, they don't have to have a copy of every document in there. But if you do have the small binder that I've talked about, I would make a quick copy of that because that's typically held on a computer, or just make a paper copy of it. And then, you know, on that, but I actually have on my top sheet, you know, listed, I have other documents stored, you know, in this location, so that I'm not, you know, giving my minor children a copy of everything, but they know where to find it in case they would need to.
All right, well, that kind of comes to the end of the presentation for us. So thank you, Ruth, for sharing all that information. Just want to quickly give a little summary of everything that we've talked about. So today we've discussed why it's important to have that emergency toolkit. We reviewed all the items that you might want to include in it, and we sent out in the chat box for you. There's a Prepare to Care publication from AARP. They have a great list, like a checklist of all of these different documents. And you can even have like a section on there, like where you write down which bank account number it is and things like that. So that's a really great publication you might want to take a look at, and that's in the chat box for you. So are the notes from today's workshop, which has that list that Ruth provided for us as well. So that lists all the items for us. And then we summed it up by talking about the proper storage and the sharing of that toolkit. So that will now bring us to our question and answer time. So if you've got questions for Ruth, you can go ahead and open up your chat box and put those questions in there now, and we will answer as many as we have time for today. But Ruth, I have a couple questions just to get us started. As you're sharing about the emergency toolkit and who you might want to share it with, would my power of attorney be somebody that I might want to give that copy of my toolkit to?
Definitely. If you are trusting someone in your life and they are your designee on a power of attorney, I would advise really sharing all this information with them, because typically that is a person that, you know, you have chosen because you trust that person. So, I mean, again, it's up to you how much of that information you share, but I would definitely share sort of what we call the top documents, where they know how to contact individuals, who to call, your insurance agent, your doctor's list, things like that. I would definitely share that with your power of attorney, because they're going to be the person in charge if something happens.
Okay, so we've got a question that just came in the chat box. The question says, what are your thoughts about the exposure that this kit poses as far as all the personal information? So what are your kind of thoughts on the security of this?
Right, and I would definitely advise that you keep it secure. Put it in a lockbox at your house. As I said, that's sort of what I do, because if it's a firebox, so, you know, if the worst happened, I could pick it up and take it if I needed to. And then I make sure my brother has the extra key to that box. So the box stays locked and I know where the key is, but if, you know, and I feel like, you know, that protects my information inside the house. But if for some reason something happened to me, there is another individual that has that key, because they wouldn't be able to find it, you know, in my house. So.
And I know, Ruth, we had a previous conversation about some of the more updated lock boxes have that thumbprint feature, but you had a comment on that as well, I remember.
Yes, I've noticed that they're selling a lot more of these sort of digital devices now, where you put your thumbprint or some kind of, you know, identification. And just make sure that if you purchase one of those, that the nicer ones I've seen have the extra key, so that if some reason that system fails, or, you know, you are not available because it's your biometric that you're entering, then someone else has that key. Again, it has that backup key system.
Right, right. So I know that this has been a lot of information. We've got the resources in the chat box for you, but if you know or you're thinking of somebody who might want to watch this presentation, we did record it for you today. It's going to be available on our website by Monday, and we would certainly suggest that you share it with your loved ones, especially if maybe they're going to be that trusted person that you're going to be giving your extra key to, or maybe that emergency contact list. It might be a good idea for them to go back and watch this as well. So maybe they'll create their own toolkit. And certainly if you're someone that's maybe caring for an older family member or something like that, it might be important to also, you know, use that checklist from AARP or run down the list that Ruth has also provided, and make sure that you've started to create your own binder as well. I know I've talked about this with my own parents. They're not too old, but they're, getting older, and they've said, something were to ever happen, this is the lawyer you call, this is our accountant, and then you can kind of take it from there. But it's important, like you said, Ruth, to have those extra steps as well, those key documents, but the extra steps such as the medical information and things like that. We hadn't had those conversations yet. So I know I've certainly learned a lot from this presentation. We hope that you have learned a lot as well. Seems like we've got another question in the chat box. Okay, someone is saying they're going to probably follow up with you, Ruth, on some additional information. So again, Ruth is with the law firm of Cisneros, McElroy, and Boone. So she's certainly available to assist you if you might have any of your own personal questions as well. But we hope that you would take advantage of some of these templates that we've provided. So with that, we're going to go ahead and close out our presentation for today. So thank you, Ruth, for all that great information. I hope you all learned a lot. If you're interested in learning more about Loud and Habitat for Humanity, or maybe our Tools for Life Learning Center, you can check out our website, which is up on the screen. We will be having another free virtual workshop. It's going to be on July 15th. It's going to be a workshop geared more towards high school students, young adults, and college-age students, and even the parents who may have a child in that age category. We're going to be talking about some of the basics of money management, such as smart ways to use a credit card. And we're also going to talk about preparing to pay for college. So if you know that might be a great presentation for you, someone you know, or maybe your child, we hope that you would join us for that. And so we hope to see you all again soon. Have a great rest of your day.